All right, well, let's continue with our focus on the humanitarian crisis caused by COVID-19 pandemic and to look at the impact of COVID-19 on the poor and how the pandemic will drive temporary and long-term changes in poverty and the poverty level. When I'm joined by Director of Studies in Poverty and Inequality Institute, Isobel Frye, joining us via Skype. I mean, the impact of COVID-19 on humanitarian activity seems to be quite obvious. The fact that people that are involved in humanitarian activities are not able really to go out as much as they should to help those in need. But draw us a clear picture of really the problems that are being faced at this time.
Thanks, Flo. Good afternoon. I think the point that you highlight is really critical, and that's the issue of the humanitarian aspects of poverty. In South Africa, we have pre-existing incredibly high levels of poverty, and of course unemployment. What we have seen, and in fact last week the NIDS CRAM report came out reflecting the impact in its second wave study, is that the levels of poverty would be far higher if it weren't for the COVID relief grants that Department of Social Development made available as announced by the President. Our concern is that those grants are coming to an end at the end of this month, and National Treasury is not indicating that those are going to be renewed at all. So what we've seen is a cushioning of the real brunt of the COVID-19 on the poor and vulnerable livelihood. We anticipate that there's going to be a huge increase in malnutrition amongst children, older people, and working age people. We have been engaging through NEDLAC with government, and we were hoping to see that the medium-term budget policy statement would reflect an understanding of the need, the real urgency to extend this, because we don't want it to necessarily be a question of humanitarian food parcels. We saw, Flo, a couple of months ago how weak the response is when it comes to food parcels. Food parcels also wipe out local economies' abilities to sell, to sustain. And so really, we think that the President needs to listen to new advisors that say what you need to do is to extend social relief of distress grants to older people, to working age people, and the caregivers grant and older people's grants. Otherwise, as we get to the end of this year, we're going to see a massive level of, as I said, hunger, starvation. And the issue that you were reporting on in terms of Senegal, the kinds of social unrest and violence is going to increase as people feel completely destitute. I just wanted to add, Flo, You were asking about the longer term impact of poverty. What we saw from the labour force survey figures that were announced last week as well is that the unemployed are actually delinking from the labour market. People have stopped looking for a job. So though the narrow definition of unemployment fell, it didn't mean that more people are in unemployment. It means that fewer people actually believe that the formal labour market has a chance to include them. And so we're going to see more and more peripheral movement of vulnerable people, which means it's really bad for social cohesion, for political and economic stability. This is a window right now, and we believe that if the state wants to be on the right side of history, it really needs to listen to people's urgent calls for an expansion of that safety net that we just are not seeing.
Isobel, my concern, you raise two sort of measures, dependency measures, like food parcels and grants. We've established, as we're speaking in our conversation now, that food parcels aren't necessarily sustainable. And in fact, I don't know when last I heard that food parcels were being given out, although we know that the situation when COVID-19, when the pandemic hit South Africa is still very much the same even now. And then, of course, the issue of grants. I want to talk about the engagements that you're having with NEDLAC through government. Are there any other ways of perhaps having people being more self-sustainable in terms of being able to have longevity? I know in certain countries, there's things like farming being taught and so forth. But my concern is the issue of reliance of food parcels and really how long they can stretch. I mean, if you have a family of 10, for example, as opposed to a family maybe of 5, clearly that food parcels that you're getting is not going to last as long as it would for a family of 2, 3, or 4. So my concern is really about, and you mentioned that the long term. What are we looking at in terms of a long term? Because I really am concerned about the fact of food parcels and grants just not being sustainable in terms of the long term. And I wonder if you perhaps understand where I'm coming from in that regard.
Absolutely, Flo, and I think that it's important to be able to unpack the dynamic. So just very briefly, South Africa, unlike many other developing countries, doesn't have a rural peasantry of people attached to the land because of the way that colonialism and apartheid wiped out people's access to land. So we've got a very dependent population. We do have people have access to land. The big question is why that's not being better utilized. But I think that looking forward, what we need to accept is that the township economy is a crucial area both for providing access to food and to providing livelihoods, which go beyond the kind of extended public works and the grants. The research that our organization and many others globally have done is to show that where you have high levels of inequality, as we have in South Africa, in order to sustain local economic development, you need demand. And that's really been our argument to the state, is that you can't, it's important to pump prime cash into development finance institutions such as the small and micro enterprise development funds, things like that. But unless you have people who have the consumer power, who have that additional cash, you can't have anyone who sustains the person who's selling vegetables, the person who's doing the hair salons and things like that. So in order to ensure that people are able to perpetuate growing institutions of work, that then in turn employ others and then are able to pay the kinds of level of tax that we need to make a positive cycle. You need to have that kind of pump priming right now cash into the economy. The other thing to look at, Flo, which is a really critical aspect, and it's not a popular one to raise, is the level of cash grant income. Because if you're just giving enough to enable people to put food on the table, there's no surplus in order to look at the kinds of industries that we're looking at developing in township economies. And so for many people, there's an ideological hatred towards giving money to the poor. There's a sense that the poor are there because there's something pathological about them. They've chosen not to work. Now, where we have about 70% of people aged 15 to 24 without a job, we know that it's not a weakness of character that suggests that that's responsible for them not working. We need to give people the benefit so that if they take the risk to start that small business, they will have customers who can support them.
Yeah. All right. Well, Isobel Frye, thank you very much for giving us your time here on SABC News. We certainly do appreciate your time. Thank you for that.